Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show some work that I did on a print engine that is document based, which uses objects and collections. My name is Cannon Smith. I own Synergy Farm Solutions and I'm excited to show this to you today. I'm going to go through this presentation fairly quickly because there's a lot of demonstrations that I'd like to use to explain this, and so I won't spend too much time on the preamble. But I do need to start by talking about the reporting options that are currently available in 4D to show why I decided to create something on my own. Basically, we have these four options right now. We have the quick report editor. That's great for doing fairly quick and dirty table-based reporting, fairly simple reporting, but it does fall down if you're trying to do anything more complex than this sort of table-based reporting. We have 4D's form editor, and that can be used with the print selection and the print record commands, and allows you to create fairly complex reports, and it handles page breaking automatically, as does the quick report editor. The downside to it is that it is a little bit limited in that you pretty much have to think of whatever you're printing in horizontally swaths, and you can't really print things that are of different heights at the same time very easily if they're going to be side by side. There's some things like that that are a little bit tricky. We can also use the form editor with some new commands that came out a few years ago: print form and print object. These allow you to do pretty much anything you want on a page. The downsides to those are you pretty much have to do one page at a time. First page and second page and third page, you can't do anything other than that. And of course it's quite complex because at this point all of the page breaking is under programmatic control, aligning objects, all of those kinds of things are under your control. So powerful, but a lot of coding, a lot of work. And then of course there's some third-party tools, and to be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time with those, and so I don't have a pro or a con for those. Let me go to the next slide. So a couple of years ago, I decided I wanted to create a new printing module, and I had some ideas of what I wanted it to be. This was about the time that collections made its way into the 4D language, and between objects, or the C object, and collections, I thought I'd be able to do everything I needed to do, and that turned out to be the case. And so these were some of the things that I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to have the printing module or the printing engine be document-based. And by document-based, I mean that I wanted it to have the idea that I could add as many pages as I wanted to the document, and I wanted to be able to add content to those pages, but not necessarily in a specific order. I wanted to be able to add content to page 1 and then to page 5 and then come back and add some more to page 1. And being able to do that really makes it a lot easier to lay out some types of documents. And also I wanted it to be completely in memory, something that actually could even be saved to disk if necessary. And so that's what I mean by document-based. Reference-based, of course, everything under the hood is using C objects and collections, which makes it very fast because it is all reference-based. Also, this means that we can have multiple documents that we're working on in memory at the same time, in the same process. So that can be helpful in some instances. I wanted it to be frame-based. If you're familiar with programs like FrameMaker or Adobe InDesign, similar ones, they're based on the idea of adding content to a page in a frame. And so a typical word processor like Microsoft Word essentially starts at the top of the page and you add content as you go down the page. Where frame-based ones, you create a frame, rectangular-based frame that a thing goes into, whether it's a picture or text or anything like that. And I wanted it to be frame-based so that we could have content be laid out anywhere on the page, even overlapping. And in fact, I wanted it to be able to have frames be within frames, so you have child frames and parent frames to any level, and was able to accomplish that. Also wanted it to be style-based. I didn't want to have to think about what font and size and setting the font and size and the line characteristics and the background color and all of those things for the frames or for the content every single time I added to it. That just adds a lot of code. And so you'll see that this is style based. There are content styles and there are frame styles. So you can style the thing that's inside the frame, text or pictures, whatever it is, or the frame itself can have lines and backgrounds and that sort of thing, padding. It does take a little bit more time to set up the styles in the first place, but I've found that I typically use the same styles for most reports in an application, or maybe have a few sets of styles. And it's really easy to break those out into their own method so that just one method call sets up all the styles that I might use in a document and makes it very simple once those styles are set up. When we get into working with tables programmatically, the big trick there is breaking them from page to page and knowing where to break them. And I wanted that to be very easy to think about in code. And you'll see that I think that I've been able to accomplish that. Wanted to have a lot of page layout help. When we get into programmatic control, sometimes there's a lot of just math related code to make sure things are lined up properly, for example. And this module goes through and has lots of little helps that make sure that happens properly. And finally, I wanted to be able to do things like mix portrait and landscape pages within the same document, and this does that as well. So with that, let's jump right into the demonstrations. I'm going to spend a lot of time, I'm not going to spend very much time in the printing engine code itself. It really is quite simple code. It's well documented. It's just a lot of math at the end of the day. It's just time-saving type code. And so you can look at that if you want. And I'm going to go show a series of demonstrations, and I'm going to start with just the most simple document so you can see how to use this module, and then I'll build upon that. My idea here is never to show a really beautiful, nice-looking, full, complex report. I'm just trying to show the very simplest little bit that shows the principle I'm trying to teach in each demo. And so don't look for beautiful things here, just the concepts. So I think you can see the code here. Let me just explain how it's organized first. There's a constants folder. You actually don't need that if you're going to use this code in your own application. There's a constants file that comes with it. Or if you'd like to create your own constants in code, there's a few methods that make that easy. So I'm just including that as an extra help. So we have the constants, we have a demos folder, and we're going to walk through each of these demonstrations all the way down. We have the printing folder, and this is the base printing module code. This is the important code for everything else. And then there's one for printing tables. The printing tables code, I prefix it with ptable, is built on top of the printing module itself. And we'll use them together, but it is built on top. The idea there is that I wanted to have a printing module that was a basic foundation that other things could be built on top of. Tables was one, and we could imagine there'd be others in the future. I threw in a few utilities. These utilities actually are not used at all in here. I just added them because they can be helpful in the context of printing reports in some cases. Okay, so I have this demo map method, which is already up, and it has a few notes that if you want to follow along later on, gives you an idea of what I was trying to accomplish in each one of these demonstrations. So the best place to start any new module is with a hello world type module. So let me just open up that method, and we're going to use a very similar pattern that we'll just build on from here out. So I want to go through each of these lines and show you what the pattern is. So first of all, I'm just declaring some objects. Again, everything that we're going to be using is either an object or a collection. At the level of using the module, it's almost all objects. And so I'm creating one for a document, one for a page, and one for a frame. And that's all we're going to need this time. I'm setting the print preview to true because I want to be able to show you what's going on visually on the screen. And then we start in with the code. So the first code we're going to, or the first line, is going to create a new document in memory. It's going to store that in this doc variable, and we'll come back and explain what some of the parameters are later. But the important point to know is that a document's being created. Some of the default values needed for that document are there. There's no pages involved yet, it's just a document. If there's something that goes wrong, it'll return null, so I just check to make sure it's not null. And then we add a page. So I've created a new page here. I'm passing in the document, so we know which document to add this page to. And I'm storing a reference to that page in this variable here, the page one. Okay, we have a page, it's currently blank. We want to add our hello world text to it. And so what I now want to do is I want to add a new frame to this page. And there's a few different kinds of frames we can add. I'll get to that later, but we just want to add a text frame right now. And so I need to specify which document and which page we're going to add it to, because you could add it to any page that's in the document at any time. And I'm just going to specify the text, hello world. Once that's done, I'm simply going to ask it to print this document, to basically send it to the printer. So let's run it. So I run it, and we can see here that preview has come up, and in the top left-hand corner we have hello world, just as we asked it to. Now it's worth noting a few things at the moment. At this point, you notice that the frame is in the top left-hand corner of the page, and that is by default where all the new frames will be positioned. There's ways of positioning them in a different place, and we'll come to that in a minute, but the default is top left-hand of the page itself. Also note, you can't see the frame because there's no border. By default, the style of a frame won't have any border, and the style of text, again by default, is the font and size and such that you see here. But it is important to note that the frame has automatically been sized to the intrinsic value of the text. So if we could see the frame, it would just barely be big enough for hello world. That's one thing that the module takes care of for you. It automatically sizes frames by default to be big enough to hold the text in there. Okay, so that's very simple, but it does show having a little bit of text in the window. All right, so let's go to our second demonstration. In this one, it's going to look very similar to the last one. We're starting off exactly the same, setting the preview, we're creating a new document, and then we're creating a new page, and we're creating that text frame, again, the hello world. However, we're going to position the hello world in a little bit different place. And so we have a reference to this new frame that was just added right here in this variable frame. So we're going to do two things. There's a whole bunch of methods, and I'll show them to you a little bit later, that allow you to position frames, aligning them against the page, aligning them against margins within the page, aligning them against other objects, other frames I should say, on the page. And so we're going to use a couple of those here. Basically set frame top, so we want to set the top of this frame that we just created. And where do we want to set it? Well, we want it to be the top of the page, and so we have a method here that gets the top of, sorry, not the page, but against the top margin. So we have a method here called margin top, which returns the position of the top margin of this page. So basically we're going to butt that frame up against the top of the margin. And then we want to set the frame's horizontal center, and we want it to be aligned with the page's horizontal center. And so page center returns the horizontal center of that page, and we just line those up. So a couple of quick calls to do that, and then we print it. So let's go ahead and run that, and we can see we have our same hello world, but it's now moved so the top is at the top margin of the page. By default, I think the margins are 1 inch all the way around, and that of course can be changed, but that's what that would be now, and we've centered it horizontally on the page. So very simple. All right, let's close that, and we'll move to the third demonstration. Now we're going to see how we can style. And so we have exactly the same code here as we had a moment ago, except for a couple of small changes. So we've created our new document, we've created the page. Now once we've created the page, well actually this is only important once we've created the document. This could be above the page. But styles that are defined live within a document, not on a page. And so you can define them at any time. As long as they exist in the document, you're good to go. And so the way to do that is with this command, new style content. We're creating a new style, it's a content style. And we're adding it to this document, and we're going to give it a name, header 1 in this case. And later on we'll refer to that style anytime we want to style some text or something else using the header 1 to point to it. And there's a whole bunch of things here. We're going to change the font to Georgia, the size to 24, and a bunch of other things. One quick note about the styling is that this one line is going to style the fonts. It'll style line widths and background colors and orientation and a bunch of other things like that. And all of those things live in each style. And so if you have several styles, it can be quite a few lines of code. But again, a reminder that normally you would have this out in some other method that you just call once after you've created a document, and all of the styles automatically get set up, and you don't have to do this each time you're creating a report. You just refer to the style. Okay, so we're creating the frame just like we did before, the Hello World frame, but notice we're adding one parameter, and we're telling it that we want to use the header 1 style when we're doing Hello World. And then again, we're just centering it near the top there. So let's run this, and we can see that we now have a new font and new size, and then it's bolded, and it's still the top is still at the page margin, and we're still centered. And you'll probably notice that the frame size had to increase. You can't see the frame, but it did increase, or else part of Hello World would have been cut off. And again, that's because it's doing that intrinsic sizing automatically for us. Okay, so that's demonstration 3. Let's move on to 4. Now, in number 4, what we want to do is show that we can not only have a style added for content, but we can also do a frame style. And so again, we have very similar document here. We've got our create a new page. We have that same style that we added before for content. But now we're going to add a style for the frame. Now a frame has 4 sides, and rather than having a really long list of parameters that hit all 4 sides at once, the way I've decided to do that is you can call it 4 times. And it makes it a little bit easier to read, I think. And so we call it the first time we're adding a frame style to this document. We're going to give it a name because they're referred to by names just like content styles are. It's going to be called red border. And then we're going to say that we're referring to the left side of a frame. So the rest of these parameters are defining what the left side of a frame looks like. And so in this case, we're going to say, well, it's going to be a 1 pixel size line, it's going to be a border plane, it's going to be red, there's going to be 10 pixels of padding between the left side of the border and the content, and we're going to have kind of a grayish color as the background. The background, of course, applies to the whole frame, and so we only need to specify that once, and it'll be true for the entire frame. We call this 3 more times, one for what we want the top to look like, one for the right, and one for the bottom. And then that frame style is completely defined. And then we get back to the code we had before. We create a text frame, hello world. It's using the header 1 content style, and we want it to use this new red border frame style when it draws itself. And then we just, again, center it at the top of the page. So let's run it. And you can now see that we have hello world, but you can actually see what the frame itself looks like now. You can see that the background is gray. You can see we have red all the way around, and you can see the 10 pixels of padding between the frame edge and the content all the way around as well. just going to close this, and we'll do something a little bit different here. Let's add at the top, or sorry, the left border. Let's just double that, make that 20 pixels a border, of padding, I should say. And instead of 1 pixel line, let's do 3 pixel line. Just a quick little change to show what happens there. So if I run it, you can now see there's a little more padding between the hello world and the frame, and the left side is a little bit thicker. We have a 3 pixels instead of 1. And you can of course adjust each side as needed. All right, let me just undo that, and we'll go on to the next demonstration. Actually, before I do, I need to show one more thing in this fourth demonstration. I didn't really point out this parameter, but it's kind of an interesting parameter. This time, what we said for this particular content style was we wanted no font size reduction. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to move into the next demonstration and explain a bit more what's going on. In this case, we have the same code as we had before, all the way down, except we've changed this parameter to allow font size reduction. You've probably all had a situation in printing. I've had it enough when I've been doing reports that I decided to build it right into this engine, where you have, for example, an engine, or sorry, a header maybe, and that header absolutely must fit within some size of frame, some place on the page. But you also want the content, which may be programmatically created at runtime, you want that to be as big as possible, as big of a font as possible. And so if I change this, it will automatically reduce the size of the font of that content if needed to get it to fit within the size you want. So to show that off, the only change we've made here again is I've changed that parameter. And then when we created the text frame, I'm still doing the hello world here. And the only other difference, you'll remember that by default, it will set the frame's size so that it's intrinsically the size of whatever the content is. But in this case, I want to restrict it to an exact width. I want to say this is going to be 200 pixels no matter what. And so I'm actually, in this line of code, I'm setting the frame's width to 200 pixels. Now with Hello World, we'll run that right now. You'll see it actually doesn't really make any difference. It was already about 200 pixels. Maybe it's a little bit wider than it was before. Not a big deal. And Hello World's able to be just as big as it was before. All right, well, let's close that. And I'm going to comment out our Hello World line. And I'm going to uncomment this next line, which is exactly the same, except that the text, Welcome to the 4D Summit, is longer than Hello World. No other changes. We're still limited to 200 pixels wide. You'll see if I run it, what it's done is it's automatically reduced the font to the size just enough to fit the content within the frame and the padding. And so that's just a quick little parameter that can help out in some situations. It probably saves a lot of math or looping through font sizes and checking the size and that type of thing. So, okay. Let's go on to the sixth one. What I want to show here is we're going to take a step back and look at how to set up a new document, what some of the options are for doing that. And so you'll notice that we're going to do this 3 different ways. In fact, I think I'm just going to peek into our new document method. And you'll see that it takes 1 or 2 parameters, and the settings option, we have 3 options. We can use existing settings, and what that means is if you've already called print settings yourself somewhere else in the process or whatever, or in the case I've been using so far, I'm setting up the print preview because I want that to automatically be true, then it's just going to use whatever those settings are. The default, if you don't pass in a parameter at all, or if you use this constant here, ask for settings, means that when you first ask to print this, when you call this method, it's going to automatically call print settings so the user can set up the settings, and then it'll go from there. And the final option is this one here, use past in settings. Maybe you've already have some settings that you've stored in a blob somewhere and you want to make sure that those settings are the ones used for this document. And if so, you would use that and then pass in the blob to this method. So I'm just going to close this. I'm just going to show all three of these examples in a very simplistic way. One thing I want to point out though is that as soon as you've called new document with whichever one of these parameters you end up using, all of the print setting information is stored internally inside this document reference. And so if I call this and then immediately after I called print settings and change it to do something else, several times in the process it doesn't matter, because when I call print document, it's going to immediately load in what it remembers as the settings you wanted for this particular document and use those. So I think that should be pretty handy. So I'm just going to run this, and it's going to create a document just like we've seen before, a little hello world, nothing very fancy there. And we've just run through what we normally do with the use existing settings in my print preview. But you'll see we've hit a trace mark, and now the next set, I'm going to be asked for the settings. So notice I'm not setting print preview before, it's just going to ask for it, and then it'll print the same thing. So let me run that, and here it's asking, just change it to landscape mode and ask it to open in print preview, and there you can see we've same document, but it's now in landscape mode. If I close that and come back here, now we're down to the third option, option 2, that should be third option, where we ask for the settings. Now to do that, that shouldn't be ask for settings either, that should be pass in existing settings. I don't have a blob anywhere else, so I'm going to call print settings, and then I'm going to store those settings in this blob right here, and then when I call new document, I'm going to pass them in there. You can pretend this blob came from some other place, but just to show that it works, we'll go back to regular orientation, open preview, and now we're back to regular type portrait mode here. So hopefully that gives you a little insight on how you can use the new document to set a few things up. All right, let's go into number 7. So far, everything we've had has only had one page. And so I'd like to show how we can do this with more than one page. We'll, again, make this very simple. So let's walk through the code here. I'm setting print preview. We're creating a new document. I've got a couple of different styles here. Again, this could come from some other method that's pre-built, but I'm going to do them inline. So I've got a header 1 and I've got a page number that's a little bit different, not a big deal. And then I'm going to create a page just like we've done before, store it in there. And I'm going to create a text frame on that page, and put the text hello everyone, and I'm going to use header 1 for that. And we're just going to put it at the top center just like we've done before. So not a very big change. Now here's where the change, where we start adding new things. We're going to create a new page, again in the same document. Now notice I'm reusing the same C object for this second page. That's fine, because I can get a reference to any page in the document whenever I want. I don't have to keep those around or remember what they are. So to keep my code simpler, I'm just going to use that variable over again. And I'm going to add another text frame just like I did on the first page. This time it's just going to be a little bit different. Are you enjoying Chicago? Well, we're not in Chicago, so you're probably not, but we're going to ask the question anyway. And also center that at the top. Okay, so we now have 2 pages, and each page has some text at the top. What we want to do now is we want to go back and add a page number. That's a pretty common thing to do. You build out a report of how many ever pages long. You want to be able to go back and say, this is page 1 of 7, 2 of 7, 3 of 7. And that's a little bit hard to do when you're not using a document-based printing engine. But with this printing module, it's very simple, as you'll see here. So what I'm doing, I'm going to use a for each statement. And this command here, print pages, simply returns a collection of all the pages, a reference to each page. So very simple. And we're getting it from this particular document that we're working on. And so we're going to basically just go through each of these collections, and each page will be assigned to page as we go through the for each statement. Now when we do that, we're going to be creating a frame on each page. It's going to be a text frame, so it'll be on that document on whatever page we're looking at the moment, and we want it to be page, and whatever the page number is. Well, there's a command in here that returns the page number for a certain document and page reference. And this is the page we're looking at. So this is going to be page 1 of on the first one, and then 2 of. And then there's also a convenience method to get the page count. And so we'll use that as well. And then we're asking it to use this page number style. And then we're going to position that against the top margin and the right margin. And so that shows how we can go back, add things to other pages later on. And then it's going to print the document. So let's just run that. And you can see here's page 1. We have our hello everyone, page 1 of 2 over here. If we scroll down, we see page 2, are you enjoying Chicago? Page 2 of 2, just like we were hoping. So quite simple for that type of code. Okay, let's do one more thing with multiple pages. In this case, I just want to show how we can mix portrait and landscape together in the same document. When you create a new document, of course, in the print settings at some point, portrait or landscape would already been defined, and new document makes note of whatever that is, and that becomes the default for any new page. So when we called new page before without any extra parameters, it was defaulting to either portrait or landscape based on the print settings. So we're going to go through same code here. We still got our styles at the top, but this time on the first page we're going to specify with the second parameter that we want this one in landscape regardless of what the default is. And so we're going to create that same header at the top. This is exactly the same code as the last example, except that we're forcing the first page to be in landscape. The second page, we're not adding that, so it's going to default back to what was in print settings, which will be portrait. So if I run that, you'll see that this first page is indeed in landscape mode. And you'll notice because we're using the convenience methods of asking like this frame right here to be at the right side margin and the top margin, however the page size changes, doesn't mean we have to do any different computation in the printing code. It just knows where that margin is and can put it over. Anyway, if we scroll down, you'll see that the second page is back to portrait as we'd asked for. Okay, so that is number 8. Let's go down to number 9. All right, all I've shown so far is content style frames. And I do want to show that there are some other kinds. So I'm going to go through this code, but before I do, I'm just going to actually run it so you can see the result. It'll be easier to talk about there. So I want to show on the left-hand side we have our regular text content, which we've had before, and it can be multiple lines, it's not a problem. We can have styled text as a content style. We can have pictures, we can have lines, we can have rectangles, and we can have ovals. Those are the 6 things that 4D allows us to print on a page. I'm just going to keep that up, and let's look at the code so you can see how that works. So again, we're creating a new document like before, we're creating a new page, and I just have one content style here. I'm going to call it shapes, and again, a style, I have to define everything in the style, but I'm defining some things about the shapes, like the line or outside coloring and the background coloring, and the size of the size of the border, and this would be the rounding on the square, and this would have to do with the picture, that type of thing. So that's defined, and then I'm going to create a text frame, and you've seen this lots of times already now. The only difference is I've added an end of line character in there so we can have 2 lines. And then I have one extra difference I want to show. So I've created this frame, I've set the position of the frame to be at the top left according to the margins, not the page. But then I want to remember where the bottom of that frame is. And so I have this extra variable in here, I call it last bottom, and it's going to get the frame bottom of that frame. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to lay these out underneath each other with a specific spacing all the way down. So if I lay one out, grab the bottom, then let's look at the next one here. I'm just creating a little bit of styled text, and then I'm creating the frame itself. Notice all of them start with print new frame and then text, style text, picture, line, etc. And I'm asking again, same pattern, this document, this page, and then I'm passing in this style text that I just created to form it. And it does the intrinsic sizing thing as well, and I'm going to ask it to be on the margin left, but as far as the top of it goes, I want it to be wherever the last bottom was plus 40. So that's how this gets set down here. So basically there'll be 40 pixels in between the bottom of this frame and the top of this frame. And then again, I just remember the last bottom of the frame I'm currently on. Now I read in a picture file and I create a new frame for the picture. Now, picture is a little bit different as far as intrinsic sizing goes. This picture is quite large, and so if I left it the intrinsic size, it would overwhelm the page, and I don't want that. I want to limit it so at the very biggest, it's 100 pixels in one dimension or the other, and I don't really care which. And so I'm actually setting the frame size to be 100 and 100, and then because the content style is scaled to fit proportionally, I know that the picture will still look good, and at the same time constrain it to either 100 vertical or 100 horizontal pixels. And then I just do the same thing. I put it on the left of the margin, last bottom, the top of it will be the last bottom plus 40, and then I remember it's the last bottom here. Now I do a line. Again, a line is very similar. As you know, in 4D, lines are basically drawn within the rectangle that you create. So if I have a line that's 100 wide and 20 high, it's going to create a line that looks like this. You know, basically the box would be 100 wide and then 20 wide. So that's how that works. And then we have a rectangle, which I'm telling it to be 50 by 50, and we have an oval, which is also 50 by 50. Then we print the document, and you've already seen what that looks like. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of the kinds of content that you can throw on a page. Keep in mind that this works just as well with SVG pictures, and so you can do a lot of interesting things by mixing SVG pictures with the rest of this mechanism. All right, let me close this, and let's go on to number 10. See if I missed any of the notes. No, I think we're good. Okay, so in this one, I want to show the idea of having a parent frame and what we can do with a parent frame. And I think I'll also run this to start with because it'll be easier to talk about if you can see what it does. So on this page, we have 3 frames. We have this frame up here, and this is very similar to what we've done before. We have just a regular text frame, and it'll have a little bit of styling around it so it looks the way it does. And then we have 2 more frames. So this frame here has a picture on the left-hand side with some styled text, which is centered vertically within the frame and with a little bit of space here. And then we have that exactly same frame over here, and this frame is just a duplicate of this frame moved into this new position. So let's take a look at the code that did that. We can drop down here pretty quickly. I've created a content style, which is used up here in the top one, and then I've created a frame style, which is also used up in the top one. And then I create this top frame right here, which again doesn't look any different than what you've seen before, so I won't spend too much time on that. I'm just making it go to the margin, the left margin of the page and the top margin of the page, so that's good. Now this is where it gets a little bit different. We're going to create a new frame, but this is going to be a special kind of frame called a parent frame. And a parent frame doesn't actually draw content itself. The only thing a parent frame can contain is other frames. And you can have parent frames within parent frames, so you can nest it a long ways. But the point of having a parent frame is that when you put other frames inside the parent frame, when you move and position those frames around, they position relative to where the parent is. So you can do all your positioning relative where the parent is, and then you can just move the parent frame around on the page and everything will move with it. And so a lot of times that's easier to build using that concept. In fact, the tables, which I'll show in a few minutes, make heavy use of the idea of parent and child frames so that the tables can all be moved around. In essence, every cell is actually just a frame lined up with everything else. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So we create a parent frame, and I'm going to keep this reference to it because I want to remember that. And I'm creating it on this particular page. Now I'm going to read in that file again, and I'm going to create the picture. But notice that this time I'm creating that picture frame inside the document, but instead of creating it right on the page as I would have before, like this text frame is the parent really is the page in this case. Down here I want the parent to be this parent frame, and so that's the change you have to make for that to happen. And then the rest is the same. I'm just constraining the picture to be 50 by 50, and then I'm creating the style text here. 40 V18 is here. Creating another frame, a style text frame, and again notice that the parent frame is not the page in this case, it is this parent frame that we created. And then I move it around. I'm just trying to position the 40 V18 is here text. I want it to be vertically centered within the picture frame itself, so that's where that comes in. And then I want the left hand side, see I'm setting the left hand side of the text. I want the left hand side to be 10 pixels from the right side of the picture frame. So basically that makes sure I just have 10 pixels in between here. So up until here, let me go one bit further. Now I have the content inside the frame, the parent frame, and this line of code is going to set the position of that parent frame. And I'm setting it so that the left-hand side lines up with the left-hand side of this text frame up here. You can see that I'm getting the left-hand side of the text frame and setting the left of this frame to it. And then the bottom is going to be, the top of this frame here is going to be the bottom of our text frame plus 10 pixels. Hopefully that made sense. We just basically want to line it up here and have 10 pixels between these two frames, so it lines up here. So if all we did is had the code that goes up to there and we were to print it, what we'd end up with is this text frame and this frame here, which has a picture frame in it and a text frame in it, and we would have been done. Now that's helpful to move things around, but it also allows me to show that you can duplicate frames very easily. And so if we continue on the code, we have this duplicate parent frame is the duplicate of this frame that we have here, the one that we defined up here. So we're duplicating this frame and we're duplicating it onto the same page. All right, is that onto the same page or from? Oh yes. We have to let it know, we have to tell it what page it's on as well. And so it duplicates that frame. Now when you duplicate a frame, it actually literally duplicates it as it is. So if we didn't do anything else, it would look like all that was there was this picture and this phrase, because this frame would be on top of itself and it looks exactly the same. So after we've duplicated it, then what we do is we move it so that it's over here. Basically I'm moving it so the left hand side is equal to the right hand side, and then we print the document and you see what's there. Hopefully that wasn't too convoluted of an explanation, but also hopefully you can see some of the power of having parent and child frames, building up things and going from there. One example of that could be, in fact, if you're used to FrameMaker or InDesign or programs like that, they have the idea of a master page. And you could create a page and set up several elements that were going to be on every page and call that your master page, or have multiple master pages. And then you could just duplicate a page to start off your real pages. And then when you're done, you just delete the master pages. And you can also do the same thing with these frames. You might set up a parent frame with a bunch of stuff in it, and you want that same thing to be on every page. Well, then you just duplicate the frame onto these other pages and position them as you need. And it makes for pretty fast setup for some of these repeated type reports. All right, let me close this. And this is a really good place to stop for a moment and show you a little PDF I created that's helpful when you're using this module. I have it here on the desktop, so let me just open it up. It's called the Printing Module Command Overview, and it just lists pretty much all of the commands that you'll use in a way that makes sense, or makes it easy to find the kind of command you're looking for. So it starts off, just shows how to do a basic print job so that you can remember kind of how things go. We've got our basic commands like the new document and print document, page related things, so getting your page number and duplicating a page and those sorts of things. You got your styles, the different kinds of frames you can create, some information you can use like duplicating a frame, getting all the frames in a parent, that type of thing. The layout commands, so this is where you can get the page left and the horizontal center and the width and the orientation and those kind of things of a page. Similarly with a margin, you can get the left and top position and horizontal centers and widths of the margins and those kind of things. The frame position and size is where you set, like I want to set the left or the top or the bottom of the frame or the horizontal center of the frame, or the width or the height or the intrinsic size. And there's a couple of convenience methods here, like finding out, will this frame fit inside the page or will it fit inside the margins right now, and it tells you yes or no. Oh, sorry, that wasn't setting, that was retrieving the frame sizes, just like we did with the pages and margins. This is setting them, so you can set the position, which gives you a left and right position. You can set left, top, right, bottom. Horizontal, vertical center specifically, you can set the size, and there's some other things there. Just want to point out here, when you're setting, for example, a frame left, you have an option to do it by moving or by sizing. And the difference there is, it's probably easier conceptually to look at setting the frame right. So you can imagine the frame is in some position on the page at the moment. And when you set the right-hand side of that frame, if you choose by moving, then what it's going to do is, let's say that the right-hand side is at 10 pixels, and you say you want it to be at 20 pixels. Well, it will move the whole frame over 10 pixels, so the left side also goes with it. And that's very convenient. A lot of times you just want to make sure the right side of the frame is in a particular spot, and you want the whole frame to move with it. Other times you want to use this option, which is by sizing. So if you've set the left-hand side in a specific spot, and you want it to be there, you don't want it to move, and you need the right-hand side to be somewhere else, if you use the by sizing constant, it moves the right-hand side, but the left-hand side doesn't move at all. The width of the object will just change. And so keep that in mind as you're using these examples. Anyway, there's more in this document. Just a quick help so you can get pretty quick access to all the commands as you're getting used to how to use the module. Just going to close that again and get back into the demonstration then. All right, I want to get into the tables now. So again, a reminder that the tables module is built on top of the printing module, and at its base it's just using a bunch of frames and things like that. So I'm going to build that up a bit. We'll start off with a very, very simple table. Okay, so let's walk through this code. I have a JSON document which has a bunch of information in it, and I'm just simply going to use that as the data for the tables. Again, the point here isn't to try and make a really beautiful, fancy table. I just want to show off the principles that go into making tables. And so I'm just parsing this document. I'm resizing it down. I only want 10 rows in this table, so it does that really quickly and easily. I'm going to create a document like we had before. I'm going to create a new page like we had before. But now we get into something a little bit different. We get into the idea of a stencil. Now, when you're creating a table, every single row of the table can be as complex as you want it to be. If you want to build tables where, like maybe it has 2 or 3 rows for the header. And the first header actually doesn't show anything for the left-hand side, and then it's just a big wide column for that part of the header, which actually oversees 4 or 5 columns underneath, and the text is centered in that. And then the next part of the header is actually has columns all the way across, and you've seen those kind of tables are quite fancy, and you can do all of that. I'm not going to show how to get into that complex of tables in this presentation. Most of the time when we do tables, we just want to have headers, we want to have body rows, maybe subtotals, maybe a footer, and that's about it. And every column is going to be the same all the way down. And for that more typical situation, we can use the idea of a stencil. It's a row stencil. And the idea here is that when we create our document, we can create some stencils, and then we can use those stencils over and over again to kind of stamp out the rows as we're building up the table. These stencils also could be placed in some other method somewhere else and just called, they can be programmatically built up, whatever your needs are. In this case, we're going to do very simple ones. So to start off, we're going to create a row stencil. We're going to use exactly the same stencil for the header row and the body rows. Nothing fancy, we're just showing it as simple as possible. So to do that, we use this command, create row stencil, and we're going to store the result of this in this stencil object. I think it's worth popping into this method here and see what the options are for a stencil. The first option is whenever this row is stamped in, you want to be able to tell the module how do you want to determine how high this row should be. By default, when you're creating content, the module will make the frame as high as needed to encapsulate all of the content. But when you're doing tables, that may or may not be what you want. And so there's 2 options. You can have the height based on the content if you use this parameter, or it can be fixed if you use this parameter. And of course, if it's on the content, every row will be a different height, possibly if the content is such. And if it's fixed, then we move on to these next parameters. So we have a minimum height. Actually, forget what I just said. If it's based on content, these next 2 parameters can come into play. So if it is based on content, you can still specify a minimum height and a maximum height. And if you want to make sure it doesn't go beyond a certain bounds, depending on the content, you can define that. And if you're using the fixed method, then the 4th parameter is where you specify that fixed height, again in pixels. So you've got some control over row height as you create your stencil using that. I'm just using all zeros because I just want it to just automatically be whatever size it needs to be for each row. So now that I've created the stencil, I need to add essentially columns or cells to that stencil. So I'm going to call this create stencil cell method, passing in the stencil I just created for as many times as I have columns. In this case, I only have 2 columns, so I'm going to call it twice. And I'm basically, let's pop into it and look at this method as well. So I'm passing in the stencil, and then I'm telling it what kind of frame I want, text frame, style text frame, or picture frame. Those are the 3 options that are supported in the table module. I'm going to tell it what width that column is going to be. It's always going to be exactly the same for all rows. And then I'm going to give it a content style and a frame style. So every single cell in a row can have its own content style and its own frame style, which builds upon the styling that we've talked about before. That actually can be overridden row by row. This will be the beginning point for that setup. So in our case, I'm just saying, it's going to be a text frame. I want it to be 60 pixels wide, and I just default styles are fine. I don't really care. And the same for both columns. Okay, so we set up our stencil. Now we want to set up our table. And so to do that, we're going to use the new table command. We're going to tell it it's on this page, and we've got a few other parameters. Now I think it's worth popping into here as well for a moment. So what are our options for setting up a table? Well, the first parameter is the page, telling it what page will be added to. But then we get into the interesting ones. The second parameter tells us whether or not you want the header repeated. And what we mean by that is if this table gets broken, it has, part of it's moved to another page or another place on the page when the table is split, do you want the header to be repeated? And a lot of times if you're doing this stuff manually, that's a lot of work and calculations to figure out how to do that. Here you just say, yes, I do want it repeated, or no, I don't, and the module will take care of it from there. Also, when you're splitting a table, you can determine how many rows have to be kept together. So you don't want to have a table generally which maybe it fills up a whole page and then there's only one row left, and that one row is going to be printed all by itself on the next page. It doesn't look good. Maybe you want 3 or 4 rows to move with it if it has to be split. And this is where you tell it that. And then you can also set up from some frame styles for the table itself or the table header, and I'll explain more about what that is in a few moments. So here we're just basically saying, yes, we do want the header to go with the new table if it's split. We want at least 2 rows to stay together, and we don't care about the styling. So we created our table, and then we're going to position our table. Just set frame position. It's just the regular print commands because the table is just a frame in the end, just a parent frame. I'm going to put it up at the top left of the page margins. Okay, so the table is created, but there's nothing in it yet. So we're going to create our header row to start with. And to do that, we use this command, set stencil cell text. And all we're doing is we're basically saying, okay, remember that stencil we created up here? For the first column, I want the text in that column to be tag. And then for the second column, I want the text to be breed. And then we're going to append a row to this table from this stencil. And we just pass in the document, the table, the stencil, and we just let it know. It's important to let the table know what kind of a row this is. It can be a header row, a body row, footer row, and that's useful in some of the logic that it applies behind the scenes. So now we have our header set up, and then we just get into adding the body rows. So I'm going to do a for each back in our little table collection we pulled in from disk. Each one of those comes into a variable called data. And again, we're going to use the same pattern up here. We're going to just, okay, I'm going to look at that stencil. First column, I want to change the text to whatever's in data.tag. And then in the second column, I want it to be data.read. And then we're going to, again, append row from stencil. We're just going to append it, and this time it's a body row. We just do that over and over again. At this point, the table is built in memory. It has a header, it has 10 body rows. It's just kind of sitting there, but nothing else is really done to it. It's not actually added to the page yet. And the idea is when you create a table, you don't want to worry at all about where it might break or how many pages it might be on. You just create the entire table in memory using this type of code. And then when it's completely ready, then you worry about doing the breaking. And all of that happens with this really nifty command, ptable finalize. And in this case, our table is really small, so I don't have to do anything special. I'll show you how powerful this command can be in a few minutes. But what we're doing here is we're basically saying, okay, on this document, on this page, with this table, we want you to print that table, but we have a limit here. We don't want that table to go any further down the page than this position, the bottom margin in this case. It's not allowed to go past that. And so we pass that in, and now I know this table won't because it's a very small table, so I'm not worried about dealing with the possibility of it not doing that. And then we're going to print the document. So, okay, we've done that. Let's see what it looks like. There we go. We've got our header. We've got 10 body rows. Probably the most ugly table you've ever seen. No white spacing or anything, but just wanted to show the very base mechanics of it. Do notice, however, that this row right here, the content of the row wouldn't fit within the 60 pixels. And so it's automatically resized itself horizontally just as we wanted it to with its settings. Okay, so that was a lot of explanation for a very simple an even ugly table. Let's move on to the next section where we can add a little bit of styling to it. So in this demonstration, we're using, again, basically exactly the same code as the last one. The only difference is that we've added some styles. There is a convenience method that comes with a document, with a module called add styles to document. P-table add styles to document. And if we look in there, you can see that it just adds a bunch of frame and content styles, which we can refer to by name. I don't actually recommend using this one. I just add it so that there's something there to give you an idea, but you, again, would probably have some method somewhere in your structure that does this kind of thing, that you just call once like we have here, and then all the styles you need in a document are ready to go. So I've done that, and now I can continue on. So we've created our page, I'm creating the row stencil. The difference here is that when I create the row stencil, I'm creating two of them, one for the header row and another one for the body row, because I want them to look different. And in the header row, I'm asking it to use this style, p-table style header center, and p-table cell style black for the frame style. And these styles come out of this document here. There's all these constants that I'm using instead of just a name, just a text name. It makes it a little bit easier to use. The body row style, again, the same thing, except I'm using style body left, and then I'm still using style or cell style black for the content. All right, so we have our two stencils set up. We create our two table just like we did before. We set its frame to the top left, and then we create the header row. And this again is exactly the same as we did before, but it will be using a different style. And then we create the body rows just like we did before. Notice, I guess I should have showed this, when I appended the header row from stencil, I was using the header stencil, and then when I do the body, I'm using the body stencil. And so it stencils all those rows in, and then if we were to print it, you'll see that it looks a little less ugly. We now have the headers here are centered, and we have a little bit of lines around so you can see what the content is. So that's starting to give us a little bit of the basics of a table and how it might shape up. All right, let's go to number 13. In this case, we're going to add, let's see, oh yes, each region of the table. So this is exactly the same as it was as the last demonstration. The only difference is in this line of code right here where we create the table. And so let me go back into the method that allows us to create a table. I explained the first few parameters, but I skipped over the table, header, body, and footer frame styles. The idea here is that every cell in a row in a table can have its own content style and its own frame style. And that's really good for the cell itself. But it's also helpful to style the entire frame of a portion of the table. So for example, if you have let's say that you want to have a 1 or maybe a 2 pixel border around the entire table, but then every row you just want to have a hairline line between each row and maybe vertically and horizontally. Well, it's kind of hard to do that because if you can style the left hand side of the leftmost column and make sure it's 3 pixels, and then you can kind of figure out the rightmost side of the rightmost column and make sure it's 2 or 3 pixels and leave everything else hairline. It'll kind of work out, but then you've got to think about what's what on each side of the table. And then if you end up splitting a table, so you've got this nice 2 or 3 pixel border around the table all the way down, but then if you split a table, well, that's actually not the bottom of the table yet, right? And so when you move it to another page, that bottom is going to look like a hairline instead of being 1 pixel, and it's a bit of a mess. And so what we've done in this module is you can also specify the frame style for the entire table. And if it does that, then no matter where you put in that table, even if it's breaking to other places, after it draws all the rows in based on exactly what they want, it's also going to draw a frame based on how you're styling around the entire table portion that you're seeing there. So you can do that for a table. You can do the same thing for a header. You can do it for like the body, how many of body rows you have together, and you can do it for a footer. And that's also where, when you're defining a row, you're telling it this is a header row or this is a body row. That's how the system knows where all your body rows are and where all your header rows are. Okay, so what I've done here is I've just added this table region style black, style red, green, blue for the different parts. Let's just run it and it'll make it a little easier to understand. So here's our exact same table that we had before. The only difference is that we have a style for the entire body, or sorry, the entire table, which only has this black thicker line around it. So that was drawn. We also had one for the header, which gave it a red background and kind of a red line there. And then we had another one for the body, the entire body, which gave us this green background. So by using that concept, you can really make your tables look more consistent, especially when they start splitting across pages. And you can style entire sections of a table without having to thinking about that entire styling when you're looking at each row and in each cell. And that makes things a little bit easier. Hopefully that makes sense. You can combine them as well, which I believe we show in the next, in the next one. So in demonstration 14, we're showing exactly the same table as we did before. There's only one addition. Well, I guess it's two additions. The content style, we now have a good breed and a bad breed, and the only difference is that one of them is the text will be black and the other one the text will be red. So when we get down to the body rows, what we're doing is, if the breed of this, these are breeds of cows, if you might not have figured that out yet, but if it has a question mark in it, which means in the nomenclature for breeding, it means that part of the breed of the animal is not known. So if it has that, then we're going to set the stencil to be bad breed. And if it's a normal one, we're going to set it to be good breed. So as we're building out each row and each cell, we're just checking and changing the style on the fly. So let's see what happens when we run that. So here you can see that the normal breeds are black and the breeds that have a question mark in them are red. And so we're combining the idea of frame styles for sections of a table with frame styles and content styles for cells within a table. And this allows you to have all kinds of possibilities for tables. Okay, just two more demonstrations left. So in this next one, this is where I want to show how you can split a table. And this is where I think it gets a little bit fun. So we're going to use just, again, basically the same code that we've been using before. The difference is this time when I pull this document in, I'm not limiting it to the first 10 rows. So we're going to have a whole bunch of rows to print in this table. So we're adding our styles to the document. We're creating a new page. We've got a header row stencil and a body row stencil. I'm not worrying about the breed coloring this time. And then we've got, we're creating our new table, and I'm asking it to include the header each time it breaks and make sure at least 2 rows go with the break, and we've got our background like we had before. We're setting the frame position of the table to be the top left-hand corner. All good so far. We create our header row just like we did before, and then we cycle through and recreate all our body rows. And this is going to create, I forget how many rows, I think there's maybe 200 or 300 rows. It's going to create our entire table there. Okay, so again, I just want to point out that at this point, we've created the entire table, and we don't even care how long the table is. This is really important. You don't have to mix the code that figures out where or when to break your tables and how to add new pages or whatever. You don't have to mix that kind of code in with the code that creates the table, which really simplifies things and separates those two concerns as they should be. It makes it much easier to reason about. So by line 44, our table is completely created in memory and ready to go. It just needs to be, we just need to now make sure it goes on the right pages. And so before, I've used this finalize command all by itself and it simply printed. Now we need to actually access the power of that command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a repeat piece of code, and we're going to repeat this. So let's just walk through this. Now I know that this table, which has been defined up here, we've already set that table right now to be at the top left of the page margin. So it's already there. So when I say finalize on this, with this document, on this page, in this table, it's going to start at the top left-hand corner. And remember this parameter here, which tells us, or it tells the module, start adding that table to the page, but don't go past this position on the page. And we're just saying the bottom margin. Do not go past that position. What happens is it's going to run and it's going to start adding in the rows as it can. But when it gets to this point, if it realizes that it needs to go past it, then it's going to do a few things. Based on your settings up here, it's going to stop printing the table, and then it's going to create a new table, and it may or may not reposition the header where it needs to be, and it's going to figure out if it needs to take some extra rows with it and all of that kind of stuff. It's just handled. And it will return that table in string 0 from this, or $0 in this command. So if the table was able to fully print, then null is going to be returned here. So all I do is I check, is it not null? And if it's not null, then I know that there's more of the table that needs to be placed somewhere. And so then what am I going to do? Well, I want to put it on a different page. So I'm just going to get a quick handle to the page I'm currently on. And I'm going to call that previous page, because when it returns a table, it returns the next section of the table in the same place that the first table was. It'll be at the top left of whatever page it was on. So I'm going to get a handle to that page, and then I'm going to create a new page right here and put it in our page variable. And then I'm going to move that frame, the table, and this is the table the part that hasn't printed so far. I'm going to use this command to move that frame from the previous page onto this new page that I just barely created. And then I'm going to set the position of the frame to the margins left and top. Now that might be a little bit redundant, but if I had different margins on this second page I just set up, then I might want to make sure that I'm actually still positioning it where I want it to be. So it's going to go through and it's going to set that up. And now I come back up to repeat because table isn't null yet. And then it prints here. And then if there's still more table, it just keeps cycling through. But at some point, all the table will be printed. This will become null, and we drop out, and then the document will be printed. All right, hopefully that made sense. Let's run it and show you what it looks like. So here we have the same ugly-looking table that we've had before, but you'll notice when we get down near where the margin is, it stops. And you'll also notice, even though these are hairlines, we have a nice solid line at the bottom, and that's because of those the entire table type frames. Now if we go to the second page, you'll see the header is repeated just like we asked it to, and it continues on to the third page and even the fourth page, and then it quits. So that's how that works, and it keeps the logic for dealing with tables very simple. As I said, you separate out the actual building of the table from the positioning and splitting of a table. And really there's three things to setting up a table that can all be split out. You have the creating all of the styles and stencils, and again that can be some other method that's reused all over the place once it's set up. So that's pretty simple when it is set up. Then you have the actual creating the table, which really doesn't end up being very many lines of code in most cases. And then you have something like this that allows it to be placed and split across different pages. So pretty minimal amount of code for being able to handle tables like that. All right, let's go to the very last demo. We're just going to build off the last one, where again we're bringing in all that same data. But you'll notice that when we printed the last one, because we only had 2 columns, there was a lot of space on the page that wasn't used. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could have that column come down to the bottom of the page, but then instead of going to another page, just move over and continue flowing on the same page. And so I want to show how that's still very easy to do. So the top part of our method is exactly the same. We're just setting up the table. We get down again to line 44. At this point, the table is all set up, but nothing's been positioned. So we get into our repeat code, and this is similar to what it was last time, but there are a few changes, so let's walk through it. So again, we're going to finalize the table as we enter the repeat statement, and we're going to tell it we can't go past the margin bottom. Okay, that's good. And then if there's some more table that needs to be printed, well, then we move into here. So the first thing we want to do, actually, instead of going to another page, is we want to try moving it to the right. So remember, that frame, the next part of the table that hasn't printed, again, it starts at the top left-hand corner, exactly where the last table printed. And so all we want to do is we want to move its frame position to the right. So what we're doing is we're basically moving it to the right of itself by 40 pixels. So the left will be 40 pixels further from the right of the old table, and then just put it at the top of the margin. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, of course, we can't keep putting it to the right over and over again, because sometime you're going to run out of page on the right hand side. And so we're going to check for that right here. So we're just going to say, hey, if the frame right, the right side of the frame of the table frame is greater than the margin right for our page, then we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead, we're going to go into that code we had before where we end up creating a new page, and we move that table into the new page and set it back to the top left-hand margin. Otherwise, we'll print it where it was. And so we just keep cycling through until we come out the bottom with a null table, and then we print the document. So let's see what that might look like. There we go. So we can see it got down to the bottom, and then it came back up here, 40 pixels over. It keeps on printing. Back up top, 40 pixels over. Back up the top. Oh, it can't fit. So then we add another page, and it prints there. And then in this case, we're done. Okay. Hopefully you can see, of course, that tables, you can actually start printing a table on page 15 and then finish printing it back on page 3, or there's really no limit because of the way the module is set up for where tables are, how they split up, and they can be mix and match with other content. There's no reason you couldn't have a picture as a watermark underneath a table or anything like that. So, all right, that is the last demo. Is there anything else I want to cover? Let me just check here. I didn't show that table cells can have picture content, but they can. You can have a picture instead of text, or you can have style text or regular text. That's all normal. And I think I did mention that I'm just showing how to create a simple table row where all the rows have the same number of columns and same sizing of columns, but you can actually do anything you want. There is literally no constraint on what a table row is, other than every time you stencil in or append in a row, the next row has to be immediately under it, vertically speaking. But horizontally, every row can look different, be positioned different, whatever you want. So quite a bit of power there. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. A couple of notes about using the code in your own structure if you have a desire to. I've got some notes at the bottom of this demo map method. There is a printing constants XLF file that's in the resources folder, which you'll need to copy from the demo database into yours if you're not going to use the constants module to automatically create your own constants. Make sure you relaunch the database after you've done that. And then all you have to do is copy these two folders, your printing and printing module folders, into your structure. Hopefully you don't have any methods that start with either print or ptable. If you do, then you'll have to do something different there. There is one other thing that's important though. there's a method called print document. I'm going to open that up. On line 43 of that document, I have a commented out code. And in my own code, I have a method, and I'm sure almost everyone else does, where you're controlling a progress thermometer of some kind. I didn't pull my progress window code into this demo, but whatever thermometer method you have, progress type code you have, just replace this method with that. It's expecting to take like page 1 of 100, and so it'll show 1% as it's printing. If you do that, then you have the option when you ask it to print a document to automatically show a progress thermometer, and it'll do that. But without that code in there, then of course that won't work. So replace that with your own. And I think that is it for that. So let me just go back to the slides. I've shown the printing module command overview, which should be available with the demonstration code as well. Just a few notes about the code itself. Feel free to use any of it however you want. I do apologize if there's bugs. Feel free to report them, but you're kind of on your own there. Use it at your own risk. So thank you. I appreciate your time listening. I hope that was helpful.